He arrived in a machine that sounded like it was tearing the sky apart, a matte black helicopter, a Eurocopter H-145, the kind Navy SEALs use. It didn't land on the bluffs above my property. It hovered 50 feet over the water, a brutal vortex of wind and noise, thrashing the ancient cypress trees and whipping the surface of the cove into a frenzy. I watched from my porch as nesting cormorants scattered in a panic. This was his opening statement. Not a letter, not a phone call, but a deliberate, deafening display of power. He was Julian Croft, the tech billionaire who'd bought the other 3,000 acres of coastline. I was Dr. Eris Thorne, the marine biologist who owned the last two. My cottage wasn't just a house, it was a research station, a sanctuary, and the last thing my wife, Elara, and I built together before the cancer took her. It sat on a tiny parcel of land she'd inherited, a stubborn little foothold of history on a coast being devoured by the future. For 6 years since she passed, this place, this cove, had been my life's work and my only real connection to hers. The helicopter finally moved, landing on the cliffside he now owned.
A few minutes later, a golf cart, silent and electric, rolled down the old dirt path to my property line. Julian Croft stepped out. He looked exactly like his magazine covers, early 40s, sharp jaw, wearing a ridiculously expensive gray t-shirt that was meant to look casual. He had the calm, predatory stillness of a shark, all gentle glide and hidden teeth. He smiled, a perfectly engineered expression of warmth. "Dr. Thorne? Julian Croft. Sorry for the noise. Had to get an aerial view of the tide patterns." He gestured vaguely at the ocean, as if he were just another scientist. "What you're doing here is incredible. The papers you've published on reef regeneration? Groundbreaking." He knew my work. Of course he did. People like Croft didn't walk into a room without reading the manual for everyone inside it first. "The Elara Thorne Institute is a non-profit," I said, my voice flat. I didn't invite him to sit. "The research is what matters." "Exactly," he said, his eyes scanning past me, sizing up the cottage, the solar panels on the roof, the faint patina of sea salt on the windows. He was cataloging my net worth in a single glance. "And I want to help you continue that work, in a state-of-the-art facility. I'm building the world's first fully self-sustaining coastal research campus, Project Chimera. All clean energy, all philanthropic. I want to fund your institute in perpetuity, a $10 million endowment. All I need is this last parcel to complete the site." He said it so smoothly. A gift, not a demand. He was offering me to make my life's dream a reality, but the price was my life's anchor. He was offering me the world, but he wanted my soul. "The Institute isn't a building, Mr. Croft. It's this cove," I said, gesturing to the water behind me, now calming after his assault.
"This specific ecosystem, you can't move it." His smile tightened by a single, almost imperceptible millimeter. "Eris, may I call you Eris? Progress requires sacrifice. We can build artificial reefs, better ones, with programmable ecosystems." He spoke of nature like it was a piece of software he could debug. "My wife's ashes are scattered in that cove," I said. The words hung in the air between us, cold and heavy. It was the only weapon I had, and I knew it was a flimsy one. For the first time, his mask slipped, a flicker of annoyance. He saw my grief, not as a wound, but as a negotiating tactic. "I see," he said. He pulled a tablet from a thin briefcase the golf cart driver handed him. "My appraisal came in at $2.4 million for the property. Given the sentimental value, my final offer is $4 million. Cash. That's more than generous." It wasn't an offer. It was a verdict. "The property isn't for sale," I said. He stared at me for a long moment. The engineered warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and analytical. He was no longer trying to persuade me. He was calculating the cost of breaking me. "Everything is for sale, Eris," he said, his voice dropping. "It's just a question of whether you get to set the price or someone else does." He got back in the golf cart and disappeared up the path. The silence he left behind was heavier than the noise of his arrival.
Eris, Julian Croft has more lawyers on his personal staff than the entire Coastal Commission. He spent millions lobbying Sacramento. He'll bury us in paperwork until you can't afford to pay me anymore. But he's lying, I said, my voice tight with frustration. The truth has to matter. Ben sighed. The truth is a story. And right now, he has a much bigger microphone than you do. The microphone got bigger a week later. An article appeared in a popular tech blog, one of those sites that worships billionaires like gods. The headline read, "Visionary Julian Croft's Eco-Paradise Held Hostage by Anti-Progress Professor." The article painted me as a greedy, backward-thinking academic, standing in the way of a project that could save the planet. It mentioned the $4 million offer, framing my refusal as an extortion attempt. It was a surgical strike, designed to isolate me, to make me look unreasonable to the outside world. My email inbox, usually filled with academic correspondence, was suddenly flooded with hate mail. Strangers telling me I was a selfish monster. That was the beginning of the siege. He wasn't just coming for my land anymore. He was coming for my name.
The real world followed the digital one. A week after the article, a crisp white truck with the Monterey County seal on the door pulled up. A man in a polo shirt and clipboard named Henderson informed me that an anonymous complaint had been filed about my septic system, said it was potentially leaking into the cove, a violation of the state's Environmental Protection Act. My system was a state-of-the-art closed-loop biofilter I had designed myself. It was cleaner than the municipal water in town. I showed him the plans, the quarterly water quality test results I submitted to the university, the live sensor data on my laptop. He looked at the data with a glassy, uninterested expression. "Gotta follow procedure, Dr. Thorne. We'll need to dig up the leach field to be sure. That's a $5,000 inspection fee, plus the cost of excavation." He handed me the work order. "If we don't find anything, the county reimburses you. Eventually." Eventually. He knew and I knew that eventually meant a year of paperwork and fighting. This wasn't about environmental protection. It was about attrition. A $5,000 mosquito designed to bleed me. While I was writing the check, I heard it. A low, grinding growl from the north end of the bluffs. The sound of a diesel engine under load. Henderson glanced up. "Looks like your new neighbor isn't wasting any time." The sound was the soundtrack to my next 2 months. It started with a single bulldozer, then two, then a fleet of them. They scraped away the coastal chaparral, the sagebrush, the ancient wind-sculpted manzanita. They tore a road into the cliffside, a raw red scar on the face of the landscape I'd known my entire adult life. Dust, thick and choking, coated everything. It settled on my solar panels, cutting their efficiency in half. It filmed the surface of my saltwater tanks for the reef specimens, forcing me to run the filtration pumps 24 hours a day, draining my battery reserves. The noise was constant, a mechanical scream that started at 7 a.m. and didn't stop until dusk. The symphony of the cove, the cry of the gulls, the bark of the sea lions, the whisper of the tide against the rocks was drowned out by the roar of engines and the percussive beep of trucks in reverse. Croft was dismantling my world piece by piece, right in front of me. He was making my home unlivable. Ben Carter filed injunctions, complaints, cease and desist letters. They were all deflected by Croft's legal team with a blizzard of countermotions and procedural delays. We were ants fighting a tank. Every legal letter I paid Ben to write cost me $1,000. Every response from Croft's army of lawyers probably cost him nothing more than a fraction of a rounding error on his balance sheet. One night, I couldn't sleep. The dust was so thick I could taste it in the back of my throat, and the glare of their worksite floodlights bleached the night sky, turning what was once a canvas of stars into a hazy orange dome. I sat at Elara's old desk, the one made from reclaimed ship's timber, and felt a wave of despair so profound it was almost physical. I was failing her. I was losing her last gift. I pulled out one of her old research chests, a heavy oak box filled with her field journals. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just wanted to feel close to her, to remember the fire she had. Elara had been the real fighter. When a resort developer tried to buy this land 15 years ago, she'd been the one to stop them.
I was the quiet academic, she was the passionate activist. Her journals were filled with meticulous notes, sketches of tidal pools, and pressed specimens of algae. But underneath the scientific observations, her handwriting was a torrent of strategy and defiance. Tucked into the back of her 1998 journal, I found a folded, yellowing document. It was a copy of a land survey, but attached to it was a legal agreement I'd never seen before. It was a covenant of conservation, drafted between Elara Thorne and the California State Lands Commission. She had successfully argued that this specific cove, due to its unique biodiversity and the presence of a rare bioluminescent algae, qualified for a special protective status. The covenant permanently zoned these 2 acres and, crucially, the 500 meters of ocean extending from the shoreline as a Class 3 marine research sanctuary. It prohibited any adjacent construction that could cause significant auditory or particulate disruption. My heart started hammering in my chest. This wasn't just a zoning designation Croft's lawyers could petition to change. A covenant was a binding legal restriction tied to the deed itself, in perpetuity. It was an ironclad shield she had forged and left behind. Why had she never told me? I flipped through the journal and found the entry. "The commission agreed," she wrote. "The cove is safe. I won't tell Aris about the covenant just yet. He's a worrier. He sees fights where I see opportunities. I'll file it with the deed and keep a copy. It'll be our secret insurance policy." A ghost in the machine. A ghost in the machine. A chill went down my spine. This whole time I'd been fighting with my own limited weapons, trying to protect her memory. I never realized she had left me a sword. The noise of the bulldozers still echoed from the cliffs, but for the first time, it didn't sound like a death rattle. It sounded like a countdown. I picked up the phone and called Ben. It was 2 a.m., but I didn't care. "Ben, wake up," I said, my voice electric with a feeling I hadn't felt in years. "I think I just found a way to bury Julian Croft."
Ben Carter's reaction was a mixture of stunned silence and pure, unadulterated, legal glee. "A deed covenant? Eris, are you absolutely sure? A Class 3 sanctuary covenant is the legal equivalent of a nuclear option. They are almost impossible to get and even more impossible to break." "I'm holding it in my hands, Ben. Signed by Elara and the chairman of the Lands Commission, dated 1998. I could hear him typing furiously on his keyboard. "I'm on the county registrar's database, searching deed records for your parcel." "My God, Eris, she filed it. It's here. It was recorded and attached to the deed in November 1998. It's been sitting there, in plain sight, for over 2 decades. His voice was full of awe. Croft's legal team, for all their money, must have only done a surface-level title search. They checked for liens and zoning, but they never pulled the original deed filings. They got arrogant. They never imagined a quiet little property like yours would have that kind of armor plating." Arrogance. That was the key. Croft saw a small cottage and a grieving professor. He didn't see the ghost of a brilliant, ferocious woman who had outsmarted him 20 years before he even knew her name. "So what does this mean?" I asked, the hope in my chest feeling fragile, like a new flame. "It means," Ben said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "that we stop playing defense. You're not the one violating regulations with a leaky septic tank. He is. Every bulldozer, every truck,
Every decibel of noise over ambient levels is a direct violation of that covenant. He's the one breaking the law. But he gave me a warning. We have to be smart about this. Croft's a cornered animal now.
Don't just send a letter. He'll use his army to tie it up in court, claiming the covenant is invalid or obsolete. We need more than just the document. We need proof of the damage. We need evidence so undeniable that it forces the Coastal Commission's hand and puts him on his back foot. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a different kind of scientist. My lab wasn't the Cove anymore. It was Croft's construction site. I used my university research grants to buy a hydrophone array, underwater microphones, and a series of high-resolution acoustic sensors. I placed them at the 500-meter boundary stipulated in the covenant. I set up particulate matter sensors on my roof and a seismograph to measure the ground vibrations. I turned my quiet little research station into a surveillance outpost. The data that poured in was damning. The underwater noise from the excavation was exceeding the covenant's limits by 300%. It was a constant, low-frequency roar that was severely disrupting the marine life. The dolphins and sea lions, once daily visitors, had vanished. The particulate matter, the dust, was creating a sediment plume in the water, blocking sunlight and slowly choking the very algae the covenant was designed to protect. I was documenting the death of my wife's sanctuary, one data point at a time. While I gathered the scientific evidence, Ben found the human element. He tracked down the retired chairman of the Lands Commission, a man named Arthur Vance, now living in a retirement community in Napa. Ben flew up to meet him, carrying a copy of the covenant. Vance remembered Elara instantly. "Dr. Thorne? Of course I remember her," Vance told Ben, his voice raspy but clear. "She was a force of nature. Came into a hearing full of developers' lawyers and systematically dismantled their environmental impact report with her own data. She didn't just argue with passion, she argued with facts. We granted the covenant because she proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that her little piece of the coast was a unique, irreplaceable jewel." Ben recorded his statement, a sworn affidavit. We now had the document, the scientific proof of its violation, and the testimony of the man who signed it. We had the complete spear. We filed an emergency injunction with the Coastal Commission.
Not just a complaint, but a formal petition to enforce the covenant, backed by 200 pages of data, Arthur Vance's affidavit, and a request for an immediate cease and desist order. We sent a copy directly to Julian Croft's legal team. The silence from his end was immediate and absolute. The bulldozers on the cliff stopped. For the first time in months, I woke up to the sound of seagulls instead of engines. The quiet was so complete, it felt like a physical presence. It was the sound of fear. His fear. A week later, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize rolled down my path. This time, it wasn't Croft. A woman in a severe black suit stepped out. She introduced herself as Evelyn Reed, Croft's chief counsel. She had the weary, intelligent eyes of someone who has paid an obscene amount of money to clean up messes made by powerful men. She didn't offer a handshake. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her tone all business. "Mr. Croft is prepared to offer you $5 million in addition to the $10 million endowment for your institute in exchange for a full release from the covenant." I just looked at her. The number was staggering, almost comical. It was more money than I could ever spend. But it wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the fact that he thought the money was the point. "He broke the law," I said quietly. "He's trying to destroy a protected marine sanctuary." Evelyn Reed's expression didn't change. "He is prepared to litigate the validity of the covenant. It will be a long, expensive process, years most likely. Even if you win, the legal fees will consume a significant portion of any settlement. This offer is on the table for 24 hours. It was the same tactic, just with a bigger number. Intimidation disguised as generosity. But something had shifted. Before, they had all the power. Now they were the ones trying to make a deal. They were bleeding, and they knew it. "Tell Mr. Croft the Cove isn't for sale, and tell him I'll see him at the Coastal Commission hearing." Her jaw tightened. She knew I wasn't bluffing. As she walked back to her car, my phone rang. It was Ben. "Eris, you're not going to believe this. I got a call from a reporter, an investigative journalist named Mina Singh. She got an anonymous tip about the covenant and the injunction. She's been digging into Croft's other projects. Apparently, Project Chimera isn't his first eco-paradise. She found 2 other developments, one in Costa Rica and one in Hawaii, where he used the same playbook. He'd promise a green utopia, get environmental regulations waived, then build luxury condos with a token research facility attached. He's not a philanthropist. He's a high-tech land developer wrapping his greed in a green flag."
The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was his business model, and I was the random variable he never saw coming. "She wants to interview you," Ben said. "She thinks this could be a national story." I looked out at the cove, at the clear water, at the cypress trees standing sentinel on the rocks. I thought of Elara's handwriting in her journal, a ghost in the machine. She wasn't just protecting our home. She had laid a trap for a monster, and it had taken 20 years for him to finally step in it. "Tell the reporter," I said to Ben, my voice steady and clear. "I'm ready to talk." Maya Singh was not what I expected. She was young, sharp, and had a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. We sat on my porch, the cove serene behind us, a stark contrast to the ugly story I was about to tell. Her cameraman was unobtrusive, capturing the landscape, the details of the cottage, the framed photos of Elara on the mantelpiece. Maya did start with Croft. She started with Elara. "Tell me about the woman who fell in love with this piece of the ocean," she said. And so I did. I talked about how Elara could spend hours watching a single tide pool, how she knew the names of the individual sea anemones, how she believed this tiny cove was a microcosm of the entire planet's health. I showed her the journals, the sketches, the ghost in the machine. Only then did we talk about Croft. I laid out the data, the acoustic readings, the particulate counts. I didn't speak with anger, but with the cold, hard precision of a scientist presenting his findings. The facts were more damning than any emotional appeal. The story that aired a week later was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It was called The Billionaire and the Ghost. It wove together the beauty of the cove, the love story of Elara and me, the chilling arrogance of Croft's business model in Costa Rica and Hawaii, and the undeniable scientific data of the destruction he was causing. The centerpiece was Arthur Vance's interview, the old chairman looking directly into the camera and saying, "That covenant was a promise we made to future generations. Julian Croft is trying to bulldoze a promise."
The hashtag Ghost in the Machine started trending. My little fight had become a movement. A major environmental legal fund offered to represent me pro bono, taking the financial pressure off. The university's biology department released a statement in my defense. For a moment, I felt untouchable, but I had forgotten what Ben had warned me about, cornered animals. The counterattack came 2 days later. It wasn't a blog post this time. It was an article in the Wall Street Journal, in their technology section. The headline was subtle, professional, and utterly devastating. Academic activism, when research grants and personal vendettas collide. The article, written by a journalist known for being friendly to big tech, didn't dispute the covenant. Instead, it attacked me. It detailed how I had used university research grants, public funds, to purchase sophisticated surveillance equipment. It implied that my data was biased, collected not for pure research, but as ammunition in a personal property dispute. It painted a picture of a man exploiting his academic credentials and taxpayer money to fight a billionaire who was, according to their sources, generously offering to fund his work in a new, world-class facility. It was a disgusting, brilliant piece of character assassination. It didn't call me a liar. It just raised serious questions about my ethics. The article was a torpedo aimed at the hull of my credibility. The emails of support slowed to a trickle. They were replaced by emails from colleagues, cautiously asking for clarification. The university's statement of support was quietly removed from their website. The next day, I got the call I was dreading. It was from Dean Albright, the head of the College of Sciences. He was a good man, a brilliant physicist, but he was also a politician who had to manage the university's billion-dollar endowment. "Eris, I need you to come to campus." I sat in his office, a sterile, glass-walled room that overlooked the main quad. Albright looked tired. He had a copy of the journal article on his desk. "Eris, I've had 3 calls this morning from the Board of Regents. Julian Croft is a significant donor to the engineering school. He pledged $50 million for a new robotics lab last year." My stomach went cold. "He's trying to silence me." "He's making it very difficult for the university to remain neutral," Albright corrected, refusing to meet my eyes. "This article raises questions about your use of grant funds. An official inquiry has been launched. It's procedural, of course, but it's necessary." "It's a witch hunt, and you know it," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I couldn't control.
"He's manufacturing a scandal because he's losing in court." Albright steepled his fingers. "Look, I believe you, but the university has to protect itself. While this inquiry is ongoing, we're placing you on paid administrative leave. You're to cease all research activities under the university's name, and you are not to speak to the media again as a representative of this institution." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I had worked at that university for 22 years. I'd mentored dozens of graduate students. I'd published 74 papers. And in the space of a single phone call from a billionaire, all of that was erased. I was a liability. "This is what he wanted," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "To isolate me, to strip me of my name until all I am is a crazy old man in a shack on a cliff." I walked out of his office, through the campus filled with students who suddenly seemed to look at me differently, and drove back to my silent cottage. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of my life being dismantled. That night a storm rolled in off the Pacific, the first big storm of the season. Rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled, a lonely, mournful sound. I sat in the dark, watching the waves crash against the rocks, feeling a despair deeper than any I had felt before. Croft had found my real weakness. It wasn't money or legal resources. It was my identity. He was trying to take the one thing Elara had loved most about me, the scientist. I was alone, silenced, and the most important hearing of my life was less than a week away. The storm broke just before dawn. I stood on the porch, watching the bruised clouds retreat, and the air smelled clean for the first time in months. The despair of the night before had solidified into something hard and clear. Anger. Croft thought he had silenced the scientist, but he'd forgotten that data doesn't have a university ID. It just is. I spent the next 4 days, not as a professor, but as a citizen. I sent my complete, raw datasets, the hydrophone recordings, the particulate logs, the seismograph readings, to a dozen of the most respected marine biologists in the world, many of whom had emailed me after Maya's first story. I didn't ask for their support. I asked them to peer review my findings, to attack my methodology, to be scientists.
The day of the Coastal Commission hearing felt like stepping into a different reality. The room was packed. On one side, Julian Croft sat with his 4 lawyers, looking confident, almost bored. On my side, there was just Ben and me. Croft's counsel, Evelyn Reed, was masterful. She didn't challenge the covenant's existence, only its relevance. She argued it was an archaic document, and that my so-called data was the biased work of a man in a personal feud, using public funds to wage a private war. She even called Dean Albright as a witness, who reluctantly confirmed I was on leave pending an ethics inquiry. I could see the commissioners wavering. The story was compelling, a vindictive academic versus a visionary philanthropist. Then Ben stood up. "I have one final submission for the record," he said, placing a thick, bound document on each commissioner's desk.
Dr. Thorne was silenced, so the data had to speak for itself. This document contains sworn affidavits from 13 independent scientists, from Woods Hole to the Scripps Institution, all of whom have reviewed Dr. Thorne's raw data and methodology. They have all come to the same unequivocal conclusion. The construction of Project Chimera has caused catastrophic and illegal environmental disruption to the Class 3 marine sanctuary. A murmur went through the room. Reed's face went pale. Croft had bought my university's silence, but he couldn't buy the entire scientific community. Ben wasn't finished. He turned on the overhead projector. And this, he said, is a live feed from a hydrophone Dr. Thorne placed in the cove this morning. The room filled with the sound I hadn't heard in months, a series of clicks, whistles, and calls. The sound of a dolphin pod that had finally, after weeks of silence, returned.
The verdict was unanimous. Croft's project was halted indefinitely. He was fined millions for the violations, and the commission referred his entire pattern of development to the Department of Justice. It was a total victory. 2 weeks later, I was reinstated. The inquiry dropped with a quiet apology from the dean. I took the settlement money from the civil suit that followed and created the Elara Thorne Fellowship, a legal and scientific defense fund for independent researchers fighting to protect the environment. The cove is quiet now, and the dolphins are back for good. It took a billionaire, a helicopter, and an army of lawyers to teach me what my wife had known all along, that this land, this water, was never really mine. I'm just the keeper of a promise. So now, I'm asking you. Have you ever been in a fight where they tried to make it about you instead of the truth? Where they attacked your character to avoid the facts? Tell me about it below. Let's create a library of stories about how truth fights back. And if you want to see more stories about how the little guy, armed with the right data, can topple giants, hit subscribe. Because the ghost is always in the machine. You just have to know how to look for the receipts.